Hi, so this week we are returning to the subject of photography. This question of how mechanical reproduction technology intersects with how we define art is really crucial. And so I hope that you all gained a lot from looking at that essay by Walter Benjamin last week and looking at the notes. But this issue of, how we frame photographs in relationship to art is really important, especially now. I think yet again, this is another place where I would have loved to have had a conversation with you all about how these issues that Benjamin picks up, that Susan Sontag picks up, like how has this even become more pronounced in a world where social media and Instagram really do dictate much of our lives and how we interact with one another, and how we're all Instagram professional photographers by taking pictures of our brunch, taking pictures of everything, every moment. We're curating our lives to see whether or not they're Instagrammable. So I think that's a really interesting lens to read the Susan Sontag essay through. Again, a potential paper topic. I know that you all have decided paper topics, but if something like that was really appealing, I'd be open to you switching at this point. But I did want to give you a little bit of history about photography before you look at the Sontag essay. So the camera was invented in 1839. This was around the time that art, there was a huge movement of realism. This was led by the painter Courbet. Even in 1856, there was even a magazine called Realism, where just all of these painters saw themselves as profound craftsmen, depicting the world on a canvas. They didn't really see themselves as artists. They thought that they had a craft to do, which was to replicate the world perfectly in an exact imitation on the canvas. In fact, these realist painters thought that they should be able to paint the exact same painting 20 times over with no variation, right? Like you might go pick up all your photos, print it out. And they really thought this was what painting should be about. So you see that if that movement was arising in the art world and in the world of painting around the same time that the camera was invented, you see that there was a lot of contention around the introduction of the camera, and certainly around the question of whether or not photographs should be considered art. So there really was much debate here because photographs, if realism is the goal of painting, then photographs could fill that goal much more successfully and through this mechanical mode. This issue even found its way to court in 1860. I'll read that in France, there were two photographic firms that took each other to court to debate the question of whether or not photography should be viewed as art. And for the record, the court said that photography should be art. That in fact, the ways that we point the camera, the ways that we choose what to photograph are in and of themselves an artistic choice, which I think many of us now would take for granted. There was another quote I wanted to read you related to this debate. This was from a German newspaper in 1839. The quote is, "To fix fleeting images is not only impossible, as was demonstrated by a very serious experiment in Germany, it is a sacrilege. God has created man in his image, and no human machine can capture the image of God. He would have to betray all these eternal principles to allow a Frenchman in Paris to unleash such a diabolical invention upon the world." So I don't know how many of us think of a camera as a diabolical invention, but at the time it was problematic for all the reasons that we have discussed. And this question of how artistry or how intention, how creativity enters the picture, no pun intended, is tough to think about. There actually was another essay I used to assign in conjunction with the Susan Sontag essay by a man named Kendall Walton, and his philosophy is that photographs are transparent. We see through them. I think I talked last week about how when you look at a Van Gogh, part of what we're appreciating is being able to see the brushstrokes, being able to see the depth of the paint on the canvas. As we discussed already as well, the abstract expressionists wanted to talk about the flatness of the canvas, draw your attention to the canvas itself. But when you're observing a photograph, you are looking through the actual photograph. You're looking at the thing that is being photographed. So there's this really interesting thing that happens in that transparency and the way that we, our eye travels into and to the object being photographed. So again, with this question, what is art? Is art the photograph, or is art the thing that is being photographed? Where is the original, right? I mean, how do we define the original of a photograph when multiple copies are typically made? Even the photograph that we look at isn't the film itself that's inside the camera. Another area that has become, or kind of muddied this discussion, is all the mixed uses of photography. Photography has obviously been used for historical record, commerce, propaganda, science. When it serves purposes outside of the art world, that also can make things more complicated. If it's just a tool to record what's happening in the world in a journalistic sense, then how can it be used as art? And, to kind of bring it to present day a little bit more, I have a few comments below where I link some of Sontag's ideas to our contemporary moment. But, if all of us with all the many filters on Instagram can become artists, I have the phone too, the special iPhone with the portrait mode. The moment I took a photo with that, I felt like I was legitimately a professional photographer. Then what does that mean for people who really are professional photographers and really are photographic artists? If all of us with all the filters and all the apps and all the fancy gizmos on our phones can seem like artists, then how are we assigning a real artistic value to work that is being produced by people who consider themselves artists or who are accepted in the institutional theory as artists? So that's just a little bit about this broader debate in which, well, certainly Walter Benjamin found himself, but then Susan Sontag, writing in the 60s and 70s, is coming at this question of photography from a different way. And I made a note down when you see the lecture notes that she's not interested in defining art. Or photography as an art. She's interested in it as a mediator for our human experience. And so you'll see that many of her points and her critiques of photography are related to the way that we live our lives and how photography, at least at that point, and I would argue even more so now in 2020, has become, a way that we escape our anxiety, a way that we use power dynamics in a negative sense, and a way that we can feel busy or look busy even when we're not, but it somehow assuages our sense of anxiety if we can take a picture, take a photograph, or, I'm sitting here, I've got my phone, maybe I should just photograph something. And I do think that a lot of that resonates. I hope that you will agree. I did make a note at the end of the lecture notes there. She took a lot of heat for this essay. A lot of people weren't really very happy with her kind of coming down so harsh on photography and photographs. And she did offer some defense, namely she personally loves photographs. She wasn't really trying to analyze it and say that it should be done away with, but that we should be critical and we should be honest with ourselves about what motivates these habits. Sontag was similar to Michel Foucault, who we read earlier in the semester, and that she was interested in power dynamics, and she was interested in the way that power manifests in society and the way that we construct identities against the background of power structures. So you can see why this essay on photography would make sense from her perspective. So take a look at all of that. I do have a link to an article about Susan Sontag that I'd like you to read that's really gives more biographical information and then frames a little bit more of her overall philosophies. And then the other ideas down below. So talk to you again soon. Bye.